Good morning, fellow quilters. Morning where I am. So, good morning it is. Glad to see you here this morning. One little introduction that my husband and I were waking up this morning and noticing something that I'm just going to share with you guys because you'll be hearing it throughout. We live on a pretty busy street and there happens to be a lot of gravel hauling trucks that go by all summer long. Sadly, this is just part of our life. There is no time of day that I can avoid it. So you'll probably hear some traffic noise in the background. I apologize. We've done everything we can to sort of mute that and make it as unobtrusive as possible. But all that said, welcome to my studio. I'm Susan Smith. My studio is Stitched by Susan, and this is Lucy, my long arm, right here beside me. I'll be stitching today on a Gamel 26-inch. It does have the Elevate system, which is the computerized system on a tablet, but I'm not using that today. This will be completely freehand, and really all my lives are. That's what my love is freehand quilting, just doodling with my 50-pound pencil. So today I'm going to be loading this quilt that is beside me, which is a small client quilt, and doing an edge-to-edge design. And the purpose of these lives is just for you to get a chance to kind of look over my shoulder. As an early quilter, I found it so daunting to embark on quilts, and just the most simple things raised questions in my mind, like how do I get the backing on square? How detailed do I need to be about squaring up the backing? How do I get it wrinkle free? Can I float the top? You know, how do I stretch out the sides and keep them taut? All those things. And of course, with long arms, we can't really go back and forth to each other's studio all that easy. So my purpose with these lives is to invite you into my studio to just watch as I'm working in real time. So it's not fancy. It's not necessarily a lesson or instructional. I'll just kind of talk as I go and walk you through the process of today's little project. You are free to ask questions at any time. If you would prelude them with a big capital Q, they'll kind of catch our eye a little more in the chat screen as it goes by. So my husband is sitting behind all the monitors and cameras, keeping an eye on those questions, and from time to time we'll stop and put them up on the screen, and I'll try and answer your questions kind of as I go. So no question is a wrong question or too simple. Ask away. Meantime, let us know where you're watching from and who all is here today. And I'm just so glad that you're here. This is so fun to kind of get together virtually and quilt together. Good morning from sunshiny Suncrest, Washington. Oh, nice. That's not very far away from me. And yeah, that's the only one I see so far. Good morning. Is that Connie? Connie, I know your picture. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Because today's project is on the smallish side, I'll talk a little bit more about my loading today than I sometimes do. So if this is your first time here, there's a good time to get introduced to my method of loading. So one more swallow of coffee, and we'll get started. Okay. It's always tricky moving the long arm because we have so many cords and wires. Someone is saying hello from Norway. Oh, welcome. What time is it in your part of the world this morning? Or today? It won't be morning there anymore, I don't think. Okay, so I'm paying attention here because I don't know if you can see it on camera, but this backing is quite... Can you see it up there? This backing is quite directional. It has little girls on swings. And today I'm loading my quilt sideways, so the length runs this way on my rails, only because it's longer than it is wide, and that makes me have to advance it fewer times. So that is a perfectly acceptable way when it's not a directional quilting pattern. You just have to pay attention so that you don't have the girls, you know, swinging on their heads. In this case, it looks like the quilt owner has opted to have them going sideways because the long part of the quilt is them top to bottom. So I'm just going to do it the way she chose then because it's not wide enough to do it the other way. So I use, oh, Susan Tippy watching from West Seattle. Hi, Susan. I've quilted for you before. Five o'clock in the evening. Very nice. Well, thank you for joining. I use the red snapper system for loading. So basically that means that in this leader here, there's a stiff red tube inside my leader, and this is kind of a U-shaped channel snapper, and it just snaps right down over that little post that's in there. Fairly quick and fairly easy. This does require that you have at least one straight side for loading your quilt, and I'll show you how that is a huge time saver in a moment and why I like the red snappers so much. So I'm being careful not to stretch my fabric too much and also not to ease it in, but the tendency is more to stretch it. So I'm being careful not to stretch it, to lay it smoothly. Then I kind of place my snapper, hold it, and that kind of holds that right in place, and then go back and do the squeezing. I do love the red snappers. They do require some hand strength. So if that is something you don't want to deal with, this is not the best choice, but for me, I love the red snappers for their speed. So now I've got one straight edge attached along here, and I'm just going to flip the excess of my quilt over the back of my long arm, and then I'm going to walk around and pull it smooth on that side. And that will enable me then to just roll my backing on without having to square my sides or the final edge. If that final edge has some unevenness in it, it doesn't matter. It will just be left as excess on that end. So you'll see as I do it, it's hard to get it all in the camera, but you'll be able to see that as I'm doing it. Oh, okay. Remind me, Lisa, to show you the tape measure. You're asking about it, and remind me if I forget. Yes, I can do that today. I'm forgetting. I have to walk around this way because of all the cables. So I'm just going to pull my backing nice and smooth over the top of my rail. And one of the things to watch for, to know that you've got it smooth, if you see any horizontal lines pulling, can you see that a little bit in the camera? That lets me know it's not quite smooth. I need to make some adjustments. It should look nice and smooth when it's done. And if my quilt had a long backing, I would smooth the whole thing down right onto the floor so that when I roll it, it pulls on perfectly straight. Okay, let's roll up. My top is going to roll off there. So now I'm just watching as I roll that it's staying smooth. And if I see the occasional little ripple in here, I'll just come in and smooth it out toward both sides. Likewise, if I were to see ripples up here, I would just be smoothing them out. I shouldn't see any diagonal wrinkles happening here. So that's an indicator this is rolling nice and smooth. One thing to watch for, I do have my seam is running top to bottom. In this backing, when I can, I run it the other way, but sometimes it's a trade-off, right? I've chosen to do it to load my quilt sideways to save passes. I would have had to load it the other way in order to have this seam horizontal. Here's how I made that judgment call. I could see that this seam was smoothly pieced and flat and not pulling tight at all, and so I've opted to run it this way. You could, as you roll, be putting some extra tension on that seam to keep it from pulling tighter, if that makes sense, because this can pull tight as you're rolling up. But again, you'll be able to see that. You'll start getting wrinkles and rumples on the side. So just watch for all of those things as you roll it up. So now I'm watching at the end of my backing to see when it gets close to the edge of my leader. And I've got about an inch or an inch and a half hanging over the edge now. Okay, I'm going to stop just a moment, ladies. We're going to change mics to try and fix the sound issues we're having, so bear with us just a moment. Okay, we're just running a check for a moment, see if that's an improvement. Okay, we got it. Sorry about that. These things happen when you're doing live episodes. So I'm rolling my little leader ahead so that my little pole that I'm going to clip on is about 1 inch in from the edge here. And this is where if I had unevenness, if one of these halves was longer than the other, I would just let that excess hang off on this end. Because I've pulled my backing on straight, I can be pretty confident that it is straight against the leader here. And so now I'll just clip it while endeavoring not to move that at all. I've seen some red snapper users, can you see me there? Yes. Kind of use this method to make it easier to snap. They hold one end back and that kind of forces the channel open. By all means, try it. I find that that distorts my fabric and shifts it. So my preferred way is to lay it on smooth, anchor it with my hand, and then come back and do the snapping. But you should always experiment and see what works for you. I'm just showing you what I do. It's not the only way. And I huff and puff a little bit while I snap these on. They do take some exertion. But just like that, we have a loaded back. And there it is, nice and smooth. Ready to go. So I know this looks taut on the camera. It's really not. I'm able to put my hand under here and I can grab my fingers through that backing. So it is pulled smooth, but not tight like a drum. Grab my batting. I'm using Hobbs 80/20 batting today, which is my very favorite all batting. Where's the end? There it is. Dave's throwing up a piece of trivia for me. March is National Quilting Month. Third Saturday in March is National Quilting Day. Oh boy, I did know March was National Quilting Month. I did not know about the Saturday. What shall we do to celebrate? There's no directionality on the front of this quilt. These are my little notes that I had into it so that I knew what thread color I had discussed with the client. So I'm going to be stitching today with a very pale aqua thread on the top, and I just have a white one on the bottom. Oh, I have my batting sideways. Whoops! See, this is what happens when you at the same time. You tend to get sidetracked. I'm sure it's never, ever happened to a quilter before that they've done that and actually quilted it in sideways, run out of batting at the end. That's never happened to anyone, right? So I float my tops, which means I'm going to baste up the left side, across the top, down the right, but the front edge of my quilt will be left floating. And I'll talk more about that as I work, how I keep it straight. But why I do it is probably just for sake of time efficiency. So freehand quilting is kind of it's my jam, my niche, if you will. So that's what I do most quilting of for my clients. So I have worked to make it as efficient as I can and take as little time as I can, because this is my bread and butter. So I have found floating to be the most efficient way. So let's get Lucy ready to go. I've loaded the thread, and I load my thread by just tying the new color and then pulling it all the way through. That was my pull. We've got a couple cameras going on today so that hopefully you can get a sense of the whole process. You will not necessarily see the effect of all the quilting well, you'll see a close-up of me quilting, but we've chosen to kind of focus on the whole quilt rather than the actual quilting, because this really isn't a quilting design instructional video. However, I will post photographs on social media afterwards so that you can come back and have a look at the quilting later. Once again, you know, you get talking about these sorts of things and you forget the last little details, and I've still got melon thread from my last quilt in the bobbin. So let's quick change that out. And once again, we're going to pause for a second and swap this mic one more time. Bear with us. Okay, checking the mic. Pop, pop, pop. Is that working? Okay, we'll give that a try. This is why we keep spare mics. Okay, so now I am basting my quilt. You certainly could do this with a larger basting stitch. Again, for the sake of ease, I just baste with the same stitch I'm going to quilt with. And I'm going to baste at a little less than 1/4 inch from the perimeter of the quilt. And I'm going to turn my vertical channel lock on so I get a straight line up the side of my quilt. And if you don't have that channel lock, then just take the time to make sure that this edge of the quilt looks nice and straight before you get stitching. But I do have the channel lock, so might as well take advantage of it. So it locks my machine from being able to move left or right, and it will stitch a straight line up the edge of my quilt. And after I get this basting on, then I will demonstrate my tape measure for Lisa, who was asking. So now I have my horizontal channel lock on. And I should stop and mention a couple things here. If I saw, are we seeing my screen, Dave? Just so I can see what we're looking at. We're close up. Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment. Let me go ahead and finish basting the top, and then I'll talk to you just a little more about basting. There's a couple ways to make sure that your quilt is lying straight along the top. Because I have my straight channel lock on, I've opted to rely on that and just adjust the quilt so that my stitching is falling within that 1/4 inch line. If my quilt had a lot of extra fabric or puckers that I thought were in it, I would have pinned that carefully across the top first to evenly distribute that fabric, but this one's nice and flat, so I'm able to take that shortcut. These are all kind of judgment calls that I make, sort of depending on the quilt. And another thing you could do if you don't have the channel lock is also pin it so that you can use kind of your leaders, the top edge of your quilt, as a visual guide, and you could pin that all in place. So I do have the shortcut of the channel lock, and I take advantage of that every chance I get, because now my quilt is basted and ready to go. So let's move Lucy to the side, and I'll show you one of my favorite tools. And that is these magnetic bars. You can see them, I think. They are just from a hardware store. They're just a couple bucks a piece. And I just place them along the front of my rails. Now, obviously, you have to have magnetic rails for that to work, but that's how I keep my floated top. Though this is not attached anywhere, these bars keep any shifting from happening, so they keep everything square and flat and in place. So I just put them end to end across the whole front of the quilt. Like that. Whew, that was loud. Tape measure. We're going to demonstrate that one quick. I don't know that I'll use it today fully because it's a small quilt and it's nice and square, but let me show you anyway what it looks like. Do you want to put this on the big screen, Dave, so it's more visible? Is that doable? So I have this huge long armor's tape measure. They call it a zero tape measure because it starts at 0 in the center and the numbers go out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 left and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right. I don't choose to use that. You certainly could, and it's a whole other process to center this and have your quilt go both ways. I do the simplest method possible. I pin my tape measure across the top of my quilt. I know you can't see me. I'm just clipping it at the other end. And I'm just using little office clips, little pinchy clips to hold it. Uber simple. Even a paper clip would work. And then I just take note of the number that I have here, which in this case is 41, and I might shift my tape a little bit so I'm at least on a 1/2 inch and not on an 1/8 or something. So it's easy to remember, right? So I'm at 41 here and I'm at 24 here. So now every time I advance my quilt, I would leave this tape measure up, roll the quilt up, and then double check that the edge of it is at 41 and at 24. And if I needed to smooth it out a little bit, I would. If I needed to squish in some excess, I would. Something else that you should watch for, if you have a quilt that you can see before you load it that it's very unsquare, you need to measure the quilt before you start loading it and find the narrowest places. And that's the measurement you'll use. And wherever there's excess, you'll have to pull it in. It does not work to stretch out the bits that are smaller, because as soon as you release off the tension of the long arm rails, that will suck back in. So if your quilt has unevenness, you need to go with the smallest width and the smallest length and bring all the excess in to match that measurement. So simple lesson on the tape. And I just keep it looped up at the end of my long arm. And that's all. Okay, Dave is saying before I quilt, he ran a poll. What's the poll today, Dave? Finish this sentence. My significant other knows what a quilt is and has made a few. Oh, wow. Nice job. Checks in on me once in a while to make sure I'm still alive. Yeah, that's kind of the way it goes in my house, too. Is still looking for the fat quarter I sent him or her to buy at Joanne's Fabric 2 years ago. I know the whole fat quarter, chubby eighth. It's not a chubby eighth, is it? I can't even remember what the eighth is called now. Yeah, they're so funny. Well, I gotta say for Dave, he actually knows quite a lot about quilting, not the least because he does all the recording of all these live videos and of my online classes and things like that. So he gets to hear me natter on about quilts all the time. So he's pretty knowledgeable. Okay, I'm gonna get one more sip of coffee and we're gonna start stitching. Dave's asking you to let him know if the music is too loud or too distracting. We do have one more thing, which is to put our side clamps on. And these two are part of the red snapper system, if you're wondering what clamps I'm using. I don't think it really matters what brand you use. Doesn't matter to me for sure. What I like about these is that they're wide, so they grip the whole expanse of the side of my quilt. You'll perhaps see it better at this end. I'll show you. Long like this, as opposed to having individual clips just pulling and kind of scalloping the edge of my quilt, if you will. Oh, hi, Sam. I use other magnets to attach my tape measure. That would certainly work too. Whatever works at your machine. Everyone's machine is a bit different in even where the rails are and where it's convenient to hang on your tape measure and things like that. So all of that, you kind of have to figure out for yourself. Alrighty, we are ready to quilt. The design I'm quilting today I call Coffee Bean. It doesn't really relate to a coffee bean except that the first quilt I ever did it on was a coffee bean fabric. And well, it's an energetic pattern, so you know, we can extrapolate coffee from there somewhere. But it basically has a lot of circles in it. And
And this is just a design from my own doodling. I have never seen it in a pantograph form or anything like that. So it's basically these fairly large circles with a little bulb, a little comma on one end, and then echoing back around. It's very casual. You can see, I'm sure, as I'm stitching, I crisscross back over my previous lines quite frequently. I like to be able to do that because it is so freeing in terms of, well, it's just not very demanding. And it makes it easier to move around the quilt top. The one thing that I do pay attention to is that I have circles going in both directions. Dave's asking me something here. I can't quilt slow, Dave, when I'm doing big circles. He's telling me slow down because it really vibrates badly, so I'm sorry about that. I'll try. I've talked a couple times before in these live sessions about my thoughts on whether to use the stitch regulator or not when I'm doing freehand quilting. So I have on the stitch regulator now. You can hear that. It's the motor is speeding and slowing as I move. When I do edge-to-edge designs in general, I prefer to stitch without the stitch regulator. If you've never done it, I really encourage you to give it a try. There is something about having that regulator on that actually puts a bit of a drag on your machine. I know that kind of sounds over the top, but give it a try and see if it's not true on your machine, but certainly on mine. When I take the stitch regulator off, it just stitches smooth like butter. And I really feel it when I'm doing circles like this. It's just smoother and easier without the stitch regulator on. I also find it, again, for my personal taste, to be more enjoyable. I kind of get in the groove and the speed of it without this constant motor noise, you know, revving and slowing. So I enjoy it much more. But when I'm talking, it's almost too many things to think about. So I'm going to leave the stitch regulator on this morning. Well, this quilt may take longer than I planned. I would usually stitch this out about, a good 30% faster than I'm going now. And that's okay. I'll enjoy spending the morning with you guys. So if anyone has questions, I will stop for sure at the end of this pass and answer them. One question I get asked quite often is, why in the world do you start at the top right-hand corner of the quilt? I don't know, because we read from left to right, and that seems to be counterintuitive, but it's kind of what I've always done. And I think I started it because early on I would do my basting on my 3 sides, and then I would just run my machine back up that right-hand side, and there I was. So maybe that's how I started it, but now it's just habitual. But there's no reason for it. It's just my little idiosyncrasy. I start on the right-hand side. So this is what freehand quilting looks like for me. Once it's all loaded, it's just a matter of quilting out each pass. It's very non-threatening. I love quilting this way. I know many freehand quilters use pantographs. I'm not sure of all their reasons because I am not a pantograph user, so I can't speak from first-hand experience. But I would imagine it's a little bit daunting to try to think of an original design, perhaps. And certainly it's maybe daunting to launch across an entire quilt top, you know, and not know exactly where you're going next. And I expect some of that comes with experience. But I'll give you a couple of my tips. And one of them is that I move across the quilt top in an approximately diagonal fashion. Can we see the whole quilt, Dave, or should I do it after a pass? So I started quilting in this corner, the upper right hand corner, and you could do it from the left too, in which case you just mirror this process. And in general, I'm covering my quilt this way in these diagonal swoops. It's not an exact science, but I'm trying to never get this area close to me all quilted and then have an awkward corner back up here that I can't get back to. That's what I'm trying to avoid. So I just kind of weave my way across the quilt. So that's how I kind of judge where I'm going next. And if I'm finding that there's an awkward corner, I mentally think through, okay, how do I quilt back up there? And in the case of these circles, you can see I've got crisscrossing lines happening everywhere. So I'll just work my way around a couple of circles until I go back in and fill that awkward corner. So I don't let that hang me up. I just move around the quilt. And of course, you can pause whenever you need to, to stop and take stock of where you've been and where you need to go and what will fit in next. I just find it super relaxing to quilt freehand, and I find it far easier to stitch from the front of the machine. I don't know that I could be comfortable stitching from the back of it anymore. I like to see what my needle is doing. I really, really do. And that, of course, is one of the pitfalls of a pantograph, is you have to stitch from the other side of the machine and just trust that your needle is going where you want it to. I expect it takes a little more practice maybe to launch into freehand like this, but in the long run, I think that this is far easier to make well-controlled quilting because you can see it. How are you going to quilt a little design and then come back later with another design that bumps up a 1/4 inch from it and know that it's right when you're quilting from the other side? That doesn't work well for me. And then too, of course, you saw the speed at which I set this up, and that's including the speed, of talking to you guys and dealing with the mic and things like that. In general, it does not take me very many minutes to get a freehand quilt loaded. There's no laying out of the pattern or, squaring it up or determining where my needle start position is. There's no matching of repeats when it's all said and done and I'm advancing to the next design. I just launch right into it. So for all those reasons, I love freehand quilting. I'm doing circles that range. The biggest ones are probably close to 3 inches on their outside edge. The smaller ones are probably 1.5 or 1.25 inches. So I'm just doing all sizes of circles, whatever fits in the corner that I need to fill up. A great advantage to a design like this is the whole time you're quilting this quilt, you're getting some intensive practice in making round circles. So this will stand you in good stead every time you try to quilt something that has roundness to it. in my mind, yet another advantage to freehand quilting is you're literally practicing your skills all the time you're quilting, almost without thinking about it, except I am putting a little bit of thought into it, and I'm not just winging my way around the quilt. I'm thinking about that as I do these circles. I'm thinking, okay, let's keep these as smooth as we can, as round as we can. And by the end of this quilt, my circles will be just that much better than they were when I began. And there I had a very tiny place to put in, so I just put in a little swirl, which I feel like plays well with this design. So it's a good solution for filling up an awkward corner. And do the same thing here. I have a little space there that I feel like is just a little too big to leave, so I'll just put a swirl in there, travel back around. So I'm aiming for my coverage to be fairly consistent overall. Because this is a pretty big and pretty loose design, it's not an exact science, but I don't want any 2-inch areas, for example, to be unquilted anywhere. So I'm almost to the end of this pass, so if you have any questions, now's a good time to be popping them up on the screen. And while I advance the quilts and reattach all the magnets and things, that'll be a great time to do some chatting over questions. And there we are at the edge. So I leave my needle down when I advance. I find that it does not distort my quilt overly, and it just saves me, once again, a few seconds. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I do have a 26-inch throat, so I have a pretty good sized space for advancing here. It's pretty much at arm's length for me to quilt right to the back of it, so I don't go to the very, very last nth degree, especially if I have an intricate design, because it can get difficult to be quilting at arm's length, right? And you may have noticed too that I keep my quilting machine quite high. Like this is, you know, rib cage height. That is personal preference. Dave's saying that's a question, so let's look at those a minute. I have to take my glasses off to read the screen. I noticed that your table is higher than the recommended belly button height. Do you find being that high you can see the needle path better? I'm having a hard time figuring out if higher or lower is better. And that's Laura. I do think it's a matter of personal preference. Because I do so much of my quilting is this free motion edge to edge, I find it far less fatiguing to be able to stand basically upright and still see my quilting area under my machine. When it's lower, I always felt like I was stooping to see what I was quilting, and that got really, really tiring. This is very high for doing intricate work or ruler work especially, because for the ruler you have to put some downward pressure on, and that is fatiguing for it to be this high. So if I'm going to do a lot of that, I don't have hydraulic lifts on my table, but it's not terribly difficult to change the height of the 4 legs. So I have a husband and a grown son. And if I'm going to be doing a lot of intricate stuff, I actually will drop it 2 or 4 inches. But for my general quilting, I keep it here. That is my personal preference. But I do encourage you to try it and see which way you like it, because you might find that another height is much easier for you. Here's another one, Sam. How do you explain this design to a client? Do you have a lookbook? With Pantos, I can assure a perfect match to what they have picked. Good question, Sam. Here's what I do. I have a Pinterest account, and I keep a couple of boards there that are particularly geared toward clients. I have an edge-to-edge board, and I try to pop in there. I do tend to quilt my same designs over and over again, right? So I can get the similar look, and so they can look there and see if they like something or not. And then I can do a bigger scale or a smaller scale easily, or we could do this change or that. So that's my lookbook, is my Pinterest board. The other thing that I do sometimes is my little plexiglass design sheets, which I've showed you guys before, but I'll pull one out this morning. Do I have one that's not written on? I don't. But these little plexiglass sheets that you can write on with a dry erase marker, I can lay right on the top with a client here, on my ironing board or whatever, and doodle out a design for them if they want something different. Because sometimes, again, a beauty of freehand quilting, sometimes I'll take an item from their fabric, for example, a particular paisley or style of flower, and they'll want something that suits their fabric or the kid that they're making a quilt for. And so that's when I would draw it out for them on this and give them an idea of what the quilting would be. My clients are pretty forgiving in that they're like, yeah, do what you think, because they come to me for my design. So again, that's kind of a personal thing, but the Pinterest boards work absolutely great for lookbooks. It's easy to save the pictures to them, easy to send the clients to them. So a lot of my bookings are done online as well. And so then my communication will be online, and I can literally send clients a link. Here's my Pinterest board of edge-to-edge quilting or custom quilting. Have a look and see if something strikes you. Oh. Okay, I'm supposed to read the questions of this poll, apparently. Summer gardening skill level. I got a green thumb. I can make a rock grow. Well, I can remember to water them. Oh, we haven't got answers yet, Dave. Does a chia pet count? Oh, these are the questions for the poll. I'm catching up. I'm sorry. So here's the question. What is your summer gardening skill level? I've got a green thumb. I can make a rock grow. Choice number 2, well, I remember to water them. Choice number 3, does a chia pet count? Yeah, I'm curious to see what your summer gardening level is. Then I'll tell you my gardening story after we get into that. So here's where if I had a large quilt, or a quilt that I was really needing to adjust the square on, I would swing my tape measure across on the top of this, or I would have just left it up while I advanced and be squaring up the edge of my quilt. But this one is A, small, and B, already pretty square. So I've just put my vertical channel lock on, and I'm just stitching the straight seam down the side. You may see that I'm pulling a little bit behind my needle, like the area that's already been stitched. I find even with a flat quilt, if I don't do that, my hopper foot will push it out in front, and it will be crooked even if it started straight, which can be totally frustrating. So that's my precautionary measure. And I usually do that on both sides when I'm basting. Whenever I'm needing to ease in a little fabric, I pull a little bit on what has already been stitched. If you want to see the Pinterest pages that I was talking about, I'm Stitched by Susan pretty much everywhere. I'm having a heck of a time. I'm just trying to put my stretcher on this side, and I'm concentrating on that, and I can't even string a sentence together while I do it. Got it. Okay, Pinterest. I am Stitched by Susan, and I have a couple of my gallery boards. So one is my gallery edge to edge, one is my gallery custom. You are welcome to have a look there. I do endeavor to update it. And if you happen to be a business quilter, and I know you are, Sam, I get a fair bit of viewing traffic actually from my Pinterest pages. So they're not a bad thing to invest a little bit of time in. So a few of you are becoming firm friends, and you've watched a few of these episodes, and you know that early on I was replacing my red snapper grippers for the side, and I didn't care for the new ones. The jury is still out on whether they're an improvement on the old design, but I will say, as I'm using them, they're loosening up and becoming much better than they were at first. At first, I actually gave up a couple times. I literally couldn't get them loaded. but I am getting used to them. They're getting used to me, and the plastic is just getting a little more receptive, flexible, responsive. I don't know what the word is, but it's getting easier. So that's good. Magnets back on. Any more questions before I launch into quilting again? Yeah. Yeah, the snappers they loosen up. So one other thing that I do in terms of how I cover the top of my quilt is my first pass, you notice I started at the right and I worked left. This current pass, I'm going to start left and work right. This doesn't really change how the quilt is covered, but it does change this. It keeps me from getting things lined up in a row or all facing the same direction. My husband keeps pointing at different cameras and I'm never sure where to look, but here I am. So sometimes going right to left and then alternating with left to right keeps me from getting things all lined up in a row like little soldiers, right? I don't really want that look, at least with this edge to edge design. I want it to be very random and flowing. So that's just another tip that helps. And I see that I've done one area that's a little bit too close to the bar, so I'm just going to roll back about 1.5 inches or 1 inch even. I think I can manage it without dislodging my magnets. And while I get set to get quilting again, a big shout out here to my good friend Dan Unger, who has provided the guitar music that you're hearing. Isn't it lovely? He's a fantastic guitarist. And he lives in Cranbrook, BC. All right, we're launching again. I need the speed governor here to tell me how fast to go. To keep reminding myself, slow her down. So once again, I am taking care too to have some of these pointing left and some of them pointing right. Again, so I don't get that terrible sameness going on. Circle after circle. This print that I'm quilting here is kind of what gave us the idea to go with this quilting design, because it's a little bit thready, a little bit, you know, just this fine twirling effect. In fact, this print is one of those fabrics that you're always reaching to pick off the loose threads and then finding, oh no, that's the fabric. As I quilt across this pass, I will tell you guys a couple of other things that are upcoming. Number one is tomorrow I'm going to do another live session similar to this, obviously a different quilt, and it's going to be in the afternoon. I can't off the top of my head think of the time, but we did list it on my Facebook page, so you can find it there. And I will be quilting an edge-to-edge feather design, which I know is a perennial favorite. So that's what that one will be. Secondly, this weekend I'm going to be doing a webinar, actually 2 webinars, but they are the same content. So you could come to either, or both, I suppose, if you wanted to. They will also be the edge-to-edge feather. And as you see with this kind of live real-time session, I'm not really teaching how to do a design. I can only think of kind of so many things at once. So in the webinar, I will be actually breaking down and teaching and demonstrating that edge-to-edge feather in quite a bit of detail. So I invite you to join me for that. It's going to be running on Saturday morning and on Sunday early evening, I guess it is. So if you happen to be a newsletter recipient already, you will get notifications of those times. If you're not, but want to know when they are, I encourage you to buzz over to my website and sign up for the newsletter. And tonight I'll be sending out an email with all the details of the times for the webinars and the links to join to see that. So it will be live as well, so you're able to ask questions, and I'll answer them. It's the same content in both of them in terms of the same instructions, but they will both be live. So, my talking will be a little bit different, and you can join up and ask questions. So there's all of that. What else, Dave? Do I need to mention anything else? So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. I know a couple of you watching today are in my Freehand Quilting Masterclass, so I purposely did a design that is not in that class so that you get to see, some more variety. And thank you for that. We're having such a good time together in that masterclass. And it is all about freehand quilting, which, as you see, is my favorite. One second. Sorry, Dave's talking in my ear. Dave, he's making jokes and making me laugh. He gets to be off camera, and then I laugh on camera. Anyway, he's saying that anyone that's in the masterclass will be recognizing the O family. And yes, indeed, you will. First cousins right here. So just for my own trivia, would a couple of you just type into the chat room, are you freehand quilters? Is that something that you love to do? And if not, why not? Do you find it daunting to just launch on your own, or do you not know what to quilt? And I think one of the most common things I'm asked is, don't you have to be an artist to be a freehand quilter? How do you think of designs? And I can honestly say that I am not an artist. But, and I will talk about this a little bit in my webinar, there are all kinds of different places to find inspiration and springboard into designs that, you don't have to be an artist and draw something just from a blank piece of paper. You can find ideas in all kinds of places and then maybe adapt them to a quilting design. But I'm just curious how most of you guys think about freehand quilting. I was kind of laughing the other day because, wanting to see how my YouTube channels were doing and so forth, I went into YouTube and Googled freehand live quilting to see what comes up first. Well, I was happy to note that mine came up first, but I think that that's possibly because I was the only person I could find that's actually doing live freehand quilting, something like this, where it's not scripted and it's not edited, it's just real-time quilting. So I don't know that that was necessarily a huge compliment, but is it useful, I guess, is where I'm going with that. with these funky little echoes that I do around the circles. Here's my little side trick. If your first pass around the circle is kind of oval in shape, you can actually totally edit that by making your echo be, what's the word I want? Overdone in the other shape, in the more circular shape. So if one of them is a little flattened on one side, then I can over exaggerate that side of my echo, and hey presto, it looks round. And by the way, those of you ladies who come to almost every one of these lives, I sure appreciate you chiming in. I appreciate your interaction, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and watch. And maybe this is a good time to ask, too. I'm a member of quite a few quilting / long arming / freehanding groups on Facebook. I'm finding that they are very hesitant to have people do anything that they in any way interpret as selling themselves or advertising themselves, and I get that. So if you ladies would like to, no pressure here, would you consider sharing these episodes when they come up? It's better received if someone who's interested in them shares them than if I get on there and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, look at me, if that makes sense. I don't want to annoy the administrators of those groups for sure by bombarding them with information. But I would absolutely love to share these around. I think that my thinking is that people do find them useful and helpful, and it's not a thing that's very common out there to see these actual, you know, no frills, no gimmicks, just actual live quilting. And no editing, right. So, you know, if there's bloopers or mistakes, they're in there. This is real life. And so I'd really like to reach particularly beginner quilters or beginner freehanders who have tons of questions or insecurities about it. And I've kind of got to a difficult corner there, so I'm just going to echo around my circle. And I think that will look fairly seamless. So get over to my edge, and there we are, ready to advance. Let's do the questions now. Do I need to move the machine so that people can see me at all, or is it okay? Looks very dark, Dave. Does it not in the picture, or am I wrong? Is that just my perception? Okay, I'm on this camera. Okay. Okay. Questions. Laura, I went over to look at the Freehand Masterclass. I didn't see the cost. So at the moment it's just in a waiting list format. It will be going live this weekend as I present these webinars. So I don't know if I can say that on these, Dave, because this is not really promotional, but it's on my page. Sorry about that, thinking out loud. I'll just tell you. It's $447 is the regular price, but I will be running a special the day of the webinar. So if you want that special, you should come to the webinar. Another question. Sheila, I love that you chose a different from the masterclass design. I did that on purpose, Sheila, just for you, because I'm trying to show variety, right? So you guys have seen, obviously, designs that are in the masterclass, so I wanted to show you some more possibilities. So yeah. Sierra, learning, still I do enjoy it, but I'm not great. Well, this is one of the beauties of freehand, is you are getting quilts done and learning all at the same time, right? You don't have to do separate practice sessions, and it pretty much always looks good. When you're working on a print quilt, that texture is going to look good. So I encourage you, yeah, enjoy the heck out of it and just do it. It'll get better and better with every quilt. Michelle, I'm intimidated with most patterns. I keep practicing, but it still looks like a kid has quilted it. You know, I think I show it in the masterclass. I think I pulled up one of my earliest quilting designs on Lucy, and I actually draw that analogy. It looks like a first grader's printing. You know, a little bit shaky, a little bit wobbly. But really, I think it's true. On a quilt, that does not show. So I wouldn't be intimidated by that. Just proceed. And if you start with any freehand design at the top of a quilt and repeat it across a whole quilt, by the end, you will be that much better, and it'll probably be pretty noticeable. So that should encourage you. Just do more quilts. And once they're washed, you know, they're cuddly and equally warm, even if there is a wobble or two. I don't think it matters, but you'll get better with every one. More? Sam, I appreciate having a friend to listen and chat with. I appreciate you too, Sam, and a fellow Canadian to boot. Can you imagine? And Pat, you say you are not an artist, perhaps not in a traditional definition, but you are an exceptional artist in every other way. I thank you, Pat, and my husband will thank you too, because he's been pounding this into my head for a long time. And I will say that when I found freehand quilting in particular, but long arm quilting in general, that is certainly my medium. And I have thought of myself as more like an artist in the last few years that I've been quilting than ever before in my life. I've never been trained as an artist, but I don't sketch well, I don't paint, I'm not a photographer necessarily, but thread and fabric are my medium. And even when I go to draw out designs for clients, I find that to be true. I can quilt out a design better than I can draw a design on my little plexi board. So Sheila, I think watching quilting is mesmerizing in itself, but your style of talking, explaining, and just being yourself is a bonus. Thanks, Sheila. I try. This is real. This is what quilting with me is like, and my effort is just to share as much of the process as I can from within the process as I'm doing it. Any more? I did get a reminder of the sharing rule on a Facebook group I belong to when I mentioned how much I love your work on my quilts, and I guess it appeared to be an ad. It was really just my enthusiasm. They forgave my mistake and didn't drum me out of the corp. I love watching you work here, even though I'm not a long arm quilter, and I'm glad when I can send my special quilts to you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you, Susan, for trying, and I don't want any of you to risk that, for sure. And that kind of is my experience, and I get where they're coming from. They don't want people constantly selling themselves in a group. That kind of maybe is intimidating to beginners in the group. But on the flip side, there are people with experience or unique tools or really helpful books, and we also do want to know about those things. So it's always a balancing act. So thank you for trying. That's all I ask. That it, Dave? That's all for questions just now. Okay, let's advance. Glasses back on. I don't think I can finish it in one more pass, so it's going to be one and a bit. So I always use the piecing of whatever quilt I'm working on. Most quilts will have some type of straight lines in them to make sure that every time I advance, I'm advancing equally. You definitely don't want to get to the end and have a quilt that go, frowning at you. So every time I advance, my eyes are just looking back and forth. Does this look square? Does this look straight? And I don't do a lot of pinning. That's just because I've done a bajillion quilts, but you certainly could. If you have any hesitation about that, then by all means, put some pins in there before you baste these edges. It's well worth it to get a straight result. And I'm serious about that. It's worth the 1 minute of pinning to get a quilt that's, a ½ inch closer to square. And early on in my quilting years, I pinned a lot more than I do now. This is just the comfort of having done it hundreds of times that allows me to take shortcuts. Maybe I should ask you guys for recommendations of Facebook groups that you are in, just that would be appropriate to share even pictures of completed quilts such as this one, right? Because that is one way to have my work be a little more visible and to just share the idea of freehand quilting with other people. So what are some of your favorite groups for sharing pictures? And we'll see if there's any new ones to me. And I'm just running to get a fresh bobbin. I don't think I talked about my thread at all. I'm using Isacord 100% poly thread. It is 40 weight. I find that it compares in thickness to 50 weight in some other brands, so I'm very happy with it. And one of the things I love about Isacord, well, there's two really favorite things, but at the top of the list is they have over 300 colors. So I can find every shade of blue or red. You know, if I'm trying to closely match a quilt for a client, I can find the exact shade, and I love that. The other thing I love about it, and this is true of many polyester threads, they are designed for high-speed stitching. So Isacord was originally designed for embroidery machines, like, you know, embroidering on your caps or the logos on your chef jackets or things like that. So it was made for high-speed machines and consequently is strong and lends itself to stitching on a long arm, and it is low lint because it's 100% polyester. All great qualities for a quilting thread. Pricing on the class, on the freehand class? Okay, so a couple things regarding the Freehand Quilting Masterclass, since you guys are asking. Dave's going to put a couple links up. One is for the wait list if you want to get on that, so that will ensure you receive any email notifications about it. 2 is for a link to the syllabus, I call it, which is a fancy word for telling you what all is included, like kind of a lesson plan for content. What else? And the regular price is $447. But when I run the webinars, I always run a special on that day. So if you're able to attend a webinar, that's the way to get the best pricing. So I didn't intend for today to be a sales pitch in any way, so I don't want to belabor the point too much. But it is an online class, and it offers access forever. So once you have taken the class, you can log into it anytime, anywhere, for any length of time. So they're not live lessons delivered at a specific time of day. They just become available to you, one lesson a week, and then once they're uploaded, you can go back to them anytime at your leisure and watch them. So if you're too busy to get at it this week, no worries. It'll be there next week, next month, and next year. Am I going too fast, producer? Sir? I need to give another shout out there, actually. My husband Dave is my producer. I definitely could not do these types of episodes nor online classes without his technical skill. So he's got the other side of my studio is all set up. There's 2 monitors and 3 cameras and I don't know how many microphones because we went through 3 of them this morning, quite a few. All those things. So he keeps all those juggling balls in the air going pretty smoothly. And I appreciate it. I don't know if you can see my quilting path at large because it's probably a closer up picture, but in my talking I kind of lost track of my diagonal motion, so I'm having to backtrack here a little bit and fill in an area that I had not. But again, that's one of the beauties of this pattern. It's very forgiving to be able to either echo or crisscross lines to be able to move wherever I see that more quilting is needed. To me, a good freehand pattern must have at least that one essential, is the ability to travel and move. And when I talk about adapting designs, that's one of the things I would always add in my adaptation. It can't be so fussy or so perfect that I'm not able to travel in some way, whether it's an echo or whether it's a crisscrossing line. I want to know before I launch into that quilting pattern, how can I move around? Because I know I'll need to. Just goes without saying. How can I move around my quilt top? And there you see a nice oval design, and I'm just going to exaggerate my circle quality when I come out of it. And now your eye reads it as round. Imagine that. Trying to think if there's anything else I have not mentioned about the products that I'm using. I think I said early on that I was using very pale aqua thread on the front of this quilt. And I have just slightly off-white on the bottom. I generally tend to use the same thread, both top and bottom, but this client did ask for the aqua on top, and of course the fabric on the back is much more cream colored, so we opted for the cream on the back. And I find that works okay because they're only a couple shades apart, right? I would definitely not use red on one side and navy on the other. No matter how good your tension is, that is going to show through one way or the other from the top to the bottom. If for no other reason, then your needle is actually piercing small holes in your quilt, and you can see the thread through, you know, the top or the bottom thread, if that makes sense. So my personal rule of thumb is it doesn't have to be identical thread top and bottom, but it should be only a shade or two separating. So I might do 2 different shades of gray, for example. And obviously this one, which is pale aqua and cream. But when I say pale aqua, I mean really pale. Like, you guys probably can't even tell that it's aqua on the camera. It's so okay. Gosh, have I mentioned that I just love quilting? I don't know if it shows or not. I'll be really honest with you guys, actually. Yesterday, I was having a rough day for reasons I don't even know. It was just a rough day. And so this morning when I woke up, I thought, you know, I'm going to start this day differently. I don't want to spend another day like that. So I started my day. I chose my blessings mug out of the cupboard for my coffee, and I thought, I'm just going to count some of my blessings today. And, you know, really way high up on that list is the fact that I found long arm quilting in my late 40s. And on the heels of that is the fact that I get to do this for my day job. And I am so grateful. almost done this pass, and then we'll have a look at your responses to the summer gardening poll. That was such a good poll. Okay, we're done that one. Oh, producer says we're doing something else first. I'm waiting. Let me just get all my apparatuses off. So I can't see the camera, Dave. I'm just seeing the poll screen. Okay. All right, Sam, I've been quilt racing you. You're going to win. Do you know, my little competitive nature, Sam, has sometimes wanted to pick a similar design to a pantograph or even a computerized, digitized design and, you know, get somebody in another room and say, okay, let's see who gets done the quilt first. Because that is a side benefit, I think, of freehand quilting. It does save time. It saves all this matching, lining up time. And the more you do it, the faster and faster you get. And cool, but I'm happy that I'm going to win. But you'll have to send me a picture of what you're working on, please, Sam. Okay, Pat, great tip on thread color between top and bobbin. Thus, you might have a backing that shows the stitching a lot, and that's okay. In my opinion, it is. So that might be an example where I have a very pale gray, for example, on the top, and I go 2 shades darker on the bottom because I've got a really dark backing. You know, so it's closer and it's not like white on black. But that's my general rule of thumb. Different quilters have different opinions about that, so there's no right and wrong. But Sam, yeah, that would be awesome. I know, wouldn't that be fun to have this little race going on between a digitized quilter and a freehander? Gotta have the glasses to put this basting in here. Okay, you should load our poll, Dave. And I'll baste around this bottom edge and then we'll take a minute to read that. So I have just eyeballed my bottom edge that it is straight. You know, once again, you could use your tape measure to give yourself a straight guideline. You could certainly pin it in place. I'm fairly confident in this quilt that I can just stitch it and call it good. I do, if you can see this on camera, I'm putting a little bit of tension on the quilt behind my stitching. So that just pulls in any excess that might otherwise push out in front of my hopper foot. And between times, I'm smoothing it with my fingers and pulling it a little bit tauter. I'm just going to move up 1 stitch with my lock. A little bit close to the edge there. But you can just see whenever I let go, I assume you're seeing close to the needle there. It pushes this fabric out a little bit in front. And if I just keep going, that will eventually add up to a wrinkle. If I put just this little bit of tension on where I've already stitched, that just pulls it under the needle just fast enough to avoid that awkwardness. And because I do have the channel lock and I'm using it, I know that my stitching line is straight. So if I pull my fabric or push it up if I've got any excess, but if I keep it in line with the stitching, then I know my quilt is going to be square. Once again, my thumb is putting a little bit of tension on this already stitched area. Keep any ripples from forming. I'm going to break thread because I am going to start my edge to edging at the other side. Okay, let's talk. How do you present the finished quilt to your clients? Well, this probably varies from quilter to quilter. I'm the only quilter I think that I personally know who offers to trim up quilts for her clients. So after I offload them off the long arm, I take a long straight edge ruler and I trim the entire perimeter, you know, just outside the basting line, so it's totally ready for them to bind. So because I do that, it's very easy to fold it into a nice, neat little bundle. And I have chosen to purchase brown paper bags with kind of raffia handle, you know, the very typical brown paper bags, and I have my logo on the side and that's what I give the quilts back to my clients in. And then I just fold whatever backing or even batting if they provided it, whatever's extra, if it's big enough for crafty projects or whatever, I just tuck it in there with the quilt and give it back to them. I usually only bag them up if we're working at a drop-off place that's not my studio. So if they come right to my studio, I don't have a plastic bag or a wrapping inside the brown paper sack. I just tuck everything in the brown paper sack. That answer the question? And if you want to see the brown paper sack, tell me and I'll run get one. And if it interests any of you, I do offer the trimming at no charge. That's one of my little perks. I quilt for quite a few clients that are, either in limited space or on the elderly side, and it's not easy for them to, for example, get up and down off the floor and get around to maneuver a quilt, or they just don't have space for it. So I find that that's valuable to them for me to offer the trimming, and it just takes me a minute. I have tables always set up for it. So my husband brought a bag for me to show you. Here we go. Stitched by Susan. And it's just, your very typical brown paper folded bag. And I think it's 16 inches this way and 12 top to bottom. So it's hard to put a queen size quilt in it. So I do, before I got these brown paper sacks, my local grocery store just has a, reusable bags, and they're kind of plasticky. I did those for a long time, and they come in all different pretty patterns. That's an option too. And so I do still buy that type of bag, or at Joann's Crafts or something, you can get the giant ones. So I use that for ultra large projects. But these brown paper sacks work for pretty much anything right up to a queen. So that's what I do. Okay, we're starting to quilt the right hand side. This is our last pass, and it's a narrow one. And we just about got it. So if you have any more questions, we didn't do the summer gardening poll, Dave. We got to do that. Okay, which camera am I on now? Okay. Summer gardening skill level. Okay, 25% have a green thumb and can make a rock grow. Good for you. And 50%, well, I remember to water them, and 25% does a chia pet count. So here's my gardening story. The last place that we lived in, and we were there for about 8 years, we had an acreage. And there was more than an acre of cultivated gardens and lawns. And at the time we bought the place, I was not yet a quilter. And so that was kind of my almost semi-retirement part-time job, was gardening. After about 5 years of that, I was about done with that part-time job. And we're talking part-time, like probably 8 to 12 hours a week I spent doing yard work. So yeah, we eventually sold that place because that just became too much. So I can garden, but I am loving the freedom of where we live now, which actually is a rental, and they do all the lawn and walkway maintenance entirely for us. So I just have whatever big pots I choose. It's very nice. Okay, here comes the last poll. I'll read the questions for you. Favorite piecing pattern? Okay, you guys should be impressed. Dave did this poll all by himself, so these are the things that he knew. I'm very impressed. So do you like flying geese, which is, yeah, you know what it is. Or wedding ring, or scrappy, or a printed pattern. What do you mean by printed pattern, Dave? Like floral fabrics, or like... Oh, I see what he means by printed pattern. So we know a lady who actually prints... well, they're like panels. So the piecing is printed on. In other words, there's no seams. So that's what he means. Do you like... So it's Carly Porter, and her company is Honest Fabric. And so she does a number of, visually, they look pieced quilts, some fairly intricate, some less so, from all kinds of different designers, but they're just printed on fabric, and then you get to quilt them. So is that your kind of piecing? Which is no piecing at all. Okay, back to quilting. One more pass. This design illustrates really well why I like having my quilting machine so high, because I'm really having to gauge, it's a big design, right? So I'm having to gauge where I've covered, and I have to look almost underneath the area where I'm quilting to see that. So even as it is, I'm stooping a fair bit to try and keep an eye on where I'm going next. But you can imagine if my machine was 3 inches lower, how much more difficult that would be. So as I said earlier, I do encourage you to experiment with it. If you've never tried your machine higher, if it's not too difficult to change, give it a whirl and see what feels comfortable for you. Lately, I've had a couple of what I call 6-figure weeks, which is to say I've put in 1 million stitches. So when you do that much quilting in a week, like, it matters. You will feel it in your shoulders and neck if you're not comfortable. So I have played around with mine at a few different levels to find what gives me the least fatigue. You can probably see there I inadvertently left an area that was kind of open, and so I'm just doing my crisscrossing, doing a bit of echoing, find my way out of that awkward corner. It does happen. Almost finished, so if you have any last questions or comments, this is the moment. And we will be back online tomorrow at, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's 1 p.m. PST, with another quilt. It's a little bit larger than this one, and I'm doing an all-over feather design on that one. Sorry, what was that, Dave? 1 p.m. PST. Dave is just confirming that. I try to vary the times of these just a little bit so that hopefully people who are watching in other parts of the world don't have to get up at the crack of dawn to see it. One more little swirl, just because it makes me happy. And that's it. A few lock stitches, and we are done. Okay, I will unload the whole thing, and as I mentioned earlier, I will post some pictures later today if I can get some good lighting, otherwise tomorrow morning, pictures of the finished project so you can see the quilting a little better. Questions now is fine. Which camera? And once you find a level height for your quilt that is comfortable, do you always keep it there? Do you ever change it depending on the design you're doing? I do change it occasionally. If I was doing a highly custom quilt that had a lot of ruler work that I needed to have this downward pressure, I would change it. It's probably a 15 or 20 minute job to change mine, so that's my gauge. Is it worth 15 or 20 minutes of changing for a 2-hour quilt? Definitely not. For a 45 or 50-hour quilt? Yes. That's my answer. I win! Thanks for slowing her down, Dave. Oh. Would you post a picture though, Sam, somewhere and tag me and I'll find it? I'd love to see what you're working on. And I was free motioning McTavish as a background fill and only 1/4 of a quilt. Still, that's a dense fill, so good for you. Anybody else? Will tomorrow's be available to watch later? Yes, they both will. So you can find them here on my Facebook page always, and in a few hours time we always get them. Gotcha. We always load them up to YouTube as well, so if that's your preferred platform for watching. It takes a little time to do that, and we have a crazy busy weekend, so it'll probably be next week till they're up on YouTube. But past episodes of this are on YouTube. And Sheila, because you asked, I've gone back into the previous YouTube episodes, and in the description I've put the name of the quilting design that I did on each one, so that you can hopefully find, you know, if you're looking for a particular one, you can find that there. Anything else? Do you have this pattern drawn out so we can see it? Thank you. Love the video. I don't really have it drawn out anywhere. I'm pretty sure there are pictures on my Pinterest gallery board. I don't know how big they are, like how much detail you can see of it. So I'll try and post in some of the pictures I have today, some that are closer up and smaller and some that are a little larger, and perhaps you can copy from that, hopefully. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me today and watching. Dave's asking, am I removing it from the frame? I can. I certainly can. I don't think that that's serious magic, but yes, I can do that and then hold it up for you and you can see it a little bit. So you saw how I started my quilt with my red snapper right here. So I pull my leader forward there, and you can't see my clip, but I have a like a clip pulling it at each end, and I put it on tight and turn my roller up so that it's fully ready to load the next quilt. That's just one more of my save a couple seconds techniques. And it is super easy to unload red snappers. Just pull them off. That's it. One and two. All right, so here is the little quilt. I don't know that you can see the quilting super well. Why don't I show the backing, Dave? Because I think the quilting might show better on the backing, and you can see the cute little girls in their swings. Okay, I'm just holding steady as I can while Dave zooms in a little. Got it? Tell me when. My arms are getting tired. Whew. There we go. So that's today's quilting. I call that one Coffee Bean. There we are. And yeah, that's one finished for the books today. Add comments if you want to. If you think of questions later, you're welcome to type them in. I will still see them in the Facebook post, and I will come back and answer them. Here's one right here from Sierra. Thank you for doing these. I get to glance at them while I'm at my desk at work. Obviously, the sound of a quilting machine is soothing. Sure it is. And when you take the stitch regulator off, even more so. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Robin, thanks for the demo. Loved it. Good. I hope that it's helpful. And I will be back tomorrow and hopefully see some of you again then. Meantime, have a great afternoon.